This story was sent to me by a woman who trusted me with the darkest truth of her life. For years, she thought her marriage was safe. She thought she knew the man she'd built everything with. Until one afternoon, a phone call shattered the illusion and she discovered the life she thought was hers was only half the story. This is a story about betrayal, hidden children, and the courage to walk away from the biggest lie of all. **** Brenda took a slow breath before reading the email. Again, it was from a woman named Danielle, who claimed her life had split in two the day her husband's secret came out. Danielle said it all started on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. She was folding laundry when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. At first, she thought it was a telemarketer, but she picked up and nothing was ever the same. The voice on the other end was female, soft but strained. She asked, "Is this Mrs. Carter?" Danielle confirmed, a little wary. Then came a sentence that would lodge in her brain forever. "I'm so sorry, but I think my children might be your husband's too." Danielle felt the world tilt under her feet. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the phone like it was the only thing keeping her from falling. She wanted to scream that it was a mistake, that the woman was crazy, that no man could live a double life for almost 10 years without slipping. But deep down, something ugly and cold whispered that this could be true. Danielle forced her voice to stay steady and asked the woman to explain. She listened as details spilled out: dates, addresses, a little girl's birthday. Each word cracked another piece of her heart. The woman's name was Melissa. She said she had met Ryan at a work event. He told her he was divorced, rebuilding his life. Melissa never questioned it until her daughter started asking why Daddy sometimes disappeared for days. Danielle kept thinking this had to be a sick prank. But when Melissa sent photos of Ryan holding a baby in a hospital room, her stomach heaved. It was his face, his smile. Danielle's hands shook so badly she could hardly end the call. When she finally managed, she sat in silence, the walls pressing in on her. Her mind raced through every anniversary, every night he'd come home late, every business trip. She wondered how many times she'd held his hand, not knowing it was still warm from someone else's bed. The betrayal was so sharp it felt physical. The next morning, Danielle woke up feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her pillow was damp with tears she couldn't remember shedding. She reached for her phone and opened the email Melissa had sent again. The photos were still there, undeniable. She saved them to a hidden folder and closed her eyes, willing herself not to scream. If she was going to confront Ryan, she needed more than pictures. She decided to start with his calendar. Over breakfast, she watched him tap through his phone, acting as if nothing had happened. He smiled at her, kissed her cheek, and said he'd be working late. Danielle nodded and kept her face calm. Inside, she was taking mental notes of every word. She had to be methodical. This was no longer her husband. This was a man she needed to expose when he left. She searched the home office for receipts and papers he might have forgotten to hide. In a drawer behind old tax documents, she found a file labeled consulting expenses. Most were ordinary, but one credit card bill caught her eye. A charge for a hotel 2 towns over, dated exactly 9 months before Melissa's daughter was born. Danielle sat on the floor, holding the bill like it was evidence in a trial. She called a lawyer the same afternoon, just to ask questions. The woman on the line was kind, patient. She explained that Danielle could subpoena more records if she chose to pursue legal action, but Danielle wasn't ready for that step yet. She needed to know how deep this went and whether her whole marriage had been a performance. The lawyer suggested she start documenting everything. So she did. Each evening, Danielle opened a notebook and wrote down what she learned. The hotel receipts, the missed anniversaries, the sudden expenses. She even noted the way Ryan's eyes shifted when she asked about his day. It was like building a puzzle with pieces she hadn't known were missing. And with every entry, the picture became clearer and crueler. Sometimes she felt like she was losing her mind. She would look across the dinner table and see the man she loved, the father of her child. But then she'd remember Melissa's voice, breaking as she confessed. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought you should know." Danielle wondered if Melissa was a victim too, or if she'd been part of the deception from the start. There were too many questions and not enough answers, but even as she felt herself unraveling, Danielle promised she wouldn't let this destroy her. She owed it to her child to stay strong. And somewhere beneath the hurt, she felt a new resolve taking shape. She wasn't just a betrayed wife. She was a woman who deserved the truth. and she would find it, no matter how much it cost her. Her first instinct was to pack a bag and run, but she didn't. Instead, she walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. She would need clarity before anything else. She told herself she wouldn't confront him until she had proof he couldn't deny. No shouting, no threats, just the cold truth she could put in front of his face. Standing there in her kitchen, Danielle realized something she'd never wanted to admit. Part of her had always suspected Ryan was hiding something, but she'd buried those suspicions under years of trust and love she thought was unbreakable. Now, she could see how fragile it all really was, and she knew she couldn't look away anymore. Danielle couldn't stop replaying the moment Melissa admitted everything. It felt like her entire life had split in two, before the truth and after. She remembered every detail: Melissa's trembling hands, the way her eyes darted to the floor, the apology that sounded rehearsed. "It started as a mistake," Melissa had whispered, but then it kept happening. Danielle had never felt so hollow. In the quiet of the night, she opened their old photo albums, page after page of birthdays, vacations, moments Melissa had been part of. The woman she'd trusted to hold her newborn was the same woman who'd held her husband in secret. Danielle's fingers hovered over a picture of the three of them, smiling at a barbecue. She wanted to tear it apart but couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. Melissa had been her closest confidant, the one she called when Ryan forgot anniversaries or came home late. All those times she poured out her worries, Melissa must have known exactly where he'd been. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was a violation of every memory, every conversation, every trust. Danielle felt like she was living with ghosts. She thought about confronting Melissa again, demanding details. But part of her was afraid to hear more, afraid that each revelation would destroy another piece of her. So she stayed silent. Instead, she focused on learning the truth in her own way. She started researching private investigators, wondering if it was time to hire someone who could follow Ryan and bring back proof. Some nights, she drafted messages to Melissa and deleted them before sending. "How could you?" she'd type. Or, "Was any of it real?" But she knew no answer would ever make this feel better. In her heart, she suspected Melissa had loved Ryan in her own twisted way, and maybe, for a moment, he'd loved her back. That possibility hurt more than anything. Danielle found herself questioning everything: every late night, every sudden business trip. Had Melissa been there all along, a shadow she never noticed? She remembered a weekend when Ryan claimed he had a conference. Melissa had come over to keep her company. They'd eaten ice cream and watched movies, and Danielle had cried about feeling alone in her marriage. Now she wondered if Melissa had gone straight from her house to the hotel. The thought made her stomach turn, but as much as it broke her, Danielle knew she had to face it all. She couldn't pretend anymore. There was no going back to ignorance. So she closed the album, wiped her tears, and whispered to the darkness, "I will not be the fool you both believed I was." And for the first time in weeks, she meant it. The next morning, Danielle called a private investigator named Clara Whitman. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook as she explained what she needed. Clara listened without judgment, just taking notes and nodding. "I've seen situations like this," she said gently. "You're not alone." Danielle wanted to believe that, but her heart still felt like it was splintering in her chest. Clara promised to start discreetly. She would track Ryan's movements, collect photos, and piece together a timeline. Danielle felt both relieved and sickened by the idea of surveillance, but she needed to know how deep the betrayal went. She needed proof that she wasn't losing her mind. She deserved to have every lie laid bare. That night, Ryan came home later than usual. He kissed her cheek like nothing had changed. But Danielle felt different, now stronger, colder. She studied his face, searching for guilt. He looked tired, distracted, and for the first time, she wondered if he was worried about being caught. The thought gave her a grim sort of satisfaction that as the days passed, Clara sent updates, photos of Ryan meeting Melissa in parking lots, receipts from dinners they shared when Danielle was home alone. It was all there in black and white. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the hope she'd secretly clung to that maybe it had just been one mistake. But it wasn't. It was a pattern. A choice. Danielle began printing everything and storing it in a binder she kept hidden in her closet. Every photo, every timestamp became part of her private archive, a record of everything she'd survived. Sometimes she would look through it late at night, reminding herself that this was real, that she wasn't imagining it, that she had every right to feel betrayed. One evening, Clara called with something new. They've been renting a cabin an hour outside the city, she said. Danielle closed her eyes, pressing her palm to her forehead. How long? She whispered. Months, Clara answered. I'm so sorry. Danielle thanked her, her voice hollow. She hung up and sat alone in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat. She realized then that she'd crossed the line. This wasn't just about knowing anymore, it was about preparing. Because no matter how much it hurt, she wasn't going to let them keep stealing pieces of her life. She was ready to do what came next. And they would never see it coming. A plan takes SHAP. Danielle knew she couldn't confront them empty-handed. She needed more than photos, she needed leverage. She began to gather copies of bank statements, credit card bills, anything that showed the money Ryan spent on Melissa. Each document felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place. The betrayal wasn't only emotional, it was financial too. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with her lawyer, a woman named Grace Patel. Grace was calm and precise, her questions gentle but thorough. Do you want to file for divorce? She asked. Danielle hesitated. Not yet, she whispered. She wanted to pick the moment herself, to control at least one part of this story. Grace nodded, understanding. Grace explained that documenting everything now would make things easier later. Danielle wrote down every date, every lie Ryan told her, every excuse. She was building her own case, one that would be impossible to deny. Even if Ryan begged for forgiveness, she would have the truth in her hands, and she would never forget how it felt to be deceived. At night, she began sleeping in the guest room, telling Ryan she needed space. He didn't argue. Maybe he thought it was guilt or sadness. Maybe he didn't care at all. Sometimes she would hear him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. She knew exactly who he was calling, and she felt a twisted relief. Let him keep lying. Let him feel safe. The cabin outside the city became her focus. Clara managed to get photos of Ryan and Melissa together there, their hands entwined, their faces soft with affection. Danielle printed them all and slid them into her binder. It was almost surreal seeing the two people she'd loved most acting like she was already gone, like she was disposable. One evening, Danielle stood by the window, looking out at the street where she'd once imagined her children playing. Everything she'd built felt tainted, but inside that bitterness, something new was growing, a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She was done being the victim. If they wanted war, she'd give them one. Quiet, precise, and unstoppable. She closed the binder, set it carefully on the shelf, and exhaled. Tomorrow, she would decide her next move. Tonight, she would let herself feel everything, the hurt, the rage, the betrayal, because once the sun rose, she wouldn't waste another tear on them. She would be ready. The final evidence. It was late on a Wednesday when Danielle got the last piece of proof she needed. Clara had managed to install a small camera in the cabin's living room. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show Ryan and Melissa together, laughing, touching, oblivious to everything but each other. Danielle watched it in silence, her hands steady. No more doubts. This wasn't revenge, she told herself. It was truth. Proof of what she'd endured behind closed doors. Proof that she wasn't crazy or overreacting. When people looked at her story, they'd see exactly who had destroyed her family. That night, Ryan came home later than usual. He smelled of cheap wine and perfume Danielle didn't recognize. She didn't confront him. Instead, she offered him dinner and watched him eat, every bite an unspoken confession. He never once looked her in the eyes. Maybe he knew she'd stopped believing his lies. Maybe he just didn't care. After he went to bed, Danielle sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the moon through the window. The house felt different, like it belonged to a stranger. She thought about packing her bags, about disappearing before morning, but no, she would not leave her own life behind. She would make them face her, face what they had done. The next morning, she called Grace. I'm ready, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Grace promised to prepare everything. Divorce papers, financial disclosures, custody arrangements. Danielle listened, her mind already rehearsing what she would say when the time came. She wanted her words to be sharp as glass, impossible to ignore. Clara offered to stay with her for a few days, to be there when the confrontation happened. Danielle almost declined, but something in her heart softened. She didn't want to be alone when the storm finally broke. She needed one person she could trust to witness the truth. Clara's loyalty was the one thing she could still believe in. That evening, Danielle sat by the fireplace, the binder in her lap. She ran her fingers over its cover, feeling the weight of all it contained. Every page was a testament to her strength, her refusal to be erased. Tomorrow would be the day everything changed, and she would walk into it unafraid. The morning was bright and cold when Danielle finally set everything in motion. She brewed coffee, set the binder neatly on the kitchen table, and waited. Ryan came down first, looking wary. He paused when he saw the binder. Melissa arrived a few minutes later, hair damp from the shower, still wearing her robe. The air crackled with tension. Danielle gestured for them to sit. Neither moved. "Sit," she repeated, her voice calm and commanding. Slowly, they obeyed. Melissa folded her hands in her lap, eyes darting from Danielle to the binder. Ryan rubbed his temples, already defeated. Danielle didn't feel pity. She felt something cleaner, relief. She opened the binder and slid it across the table. "You both know what this is," she said. Silence answered her. "I've documented everything, your meetings, the money, the cabin, the texts." Ryan swallowed hard. Melissa looked like she might faint. Danielle's voice never wavered. "You're going to admit it." For a moment, she thought they might deny everything one last time, but Ryan's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were pathetic. Melissa started crying, her face in her hands. Danielle didn't flinch. She had waited too long for apologies that never meant anything. She wouldn't pretend to care now. "You will both leave," Danielle continued. "I've spoken to my lawyer. Ryan, you'll sign the divorce papers. Melissa, you will never set foot in this house again." She felt her heart beating steadily, strong. This was her boundary finally drawn after years of betrayal, and no one was going to cross it again. Melissa looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Danielle, please, I never meant for it to happen like this." Danielle tilted her head, studying the woman who had once been her closest friend. "You meant for it to happen," she said softly. "Just not for me to find out." That truth was too heavy for Melissa to deny. When it was over, they gathered their things in silence. Ryan tried to touch Danielle's hand, but she pulled away. She watched them leave through the front door, carrying their shame with them. The house was quiet again. For the first time, the quiet felt clean. Danielle spent that first evening alone, sitting by the window with a blanket around her shoulders. The sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the living room. She felt emptied out, like a house that had been gutted to the studs. But she also felt something unexpected, possibility. It was as if she'd cleared space for something better. Her phone buzzed with messages she ignored, family asking if she was okay, friends offering to come over. She didn't want any of it. For now, she needed her own company. The quiet let her breathe without choking. She made a cup of tea and let the steam wash over her face. She was tired but awake in a new way. The next morning, she packed a small suitcase. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in the house a minute longer. The memories were too loud. She left a note on the kitchen table for the cleaning service and locked the door behind her. As she walked to her car, she felt the first glimmer of freedom. She drove without a destination, letting the roads carry her. Hours later, she checked into a coastal inn she'd once visited with her parents. The salty air made her feel young again. She opened the balcony doors and watched the waves crash. For the first time in months, she slept without nightmares. Over the next days, Danielle kept a journal. She wrote down every detail, the lies, the confessions, the way she had felt invisible, and she wrote about who she wanted to be now. Not a woman defined by betrayal, but a woman defined by her choices. She promised herself she would never shrink again. One evening, she sat at the inn's tiny bar and struck up a conversation with a woman traveling alone. They talked for hours, sharing stories of heartbreak and reinvention. Danielle realized she wasn't the only one who had been broken open, and that thought made her feel less alone. As the days passed, she began to imagine a life beyond what she'd lost, a smaller life, maybe. Quieter, but one she could trust. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew it wouldn't be more lies. That chapter was closed, and she was ready to write something new. Danielle was packing her things to leave the inn when her phone rang. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. It was Anna's husband. His voice was ragged with confusion and regret. He said he needed to talk to her about Anna, about everything. For a moment, she thought it was some kind of sick joke. But as he spoke, she felt the old dread creeping up her spine. He told her Anna had confessed everything, finally breaking down in a drunken haze, how she'd been jealous of Danielle since they were girls, how she'd pursued Marcus out of spite as much as desire. Danielle listened without interrupting, her hands gripping the edge of the dresser. Part of her wanted to hang up. Part of her needed to hear every last sordid detail. The husband said Anna was begging for forgiveness she didn't deserve. He sounded as hollowed out as Danielle had once been. She's been saying she'll do something drastic, he added quietly. I don't know what to believe anymore. His voice cracked, and she realized he was just another casualty of Anna's chaos. Danielle closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't responsible for Anna's unraveling, but she also couldn't pretend she didn't care. After she hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the waves outside. She thought about all the years she and Anna had been inseparable. The sleepovers, the whispered secrets, the promises to always be there for each other. How had it come to this? Two women wrecked by the same men and the same betrayal. But even as sorrow welled up in her, Danielle felt a strange relief. She finally knew the truth. Stripped of excuses, Anna hadn't stolen Marcus because she loved him. She'd done it because she couldn't stand to see Danielle happy. It didn't make it easier, but it made it make sense. She folded her clothes slowly, with a new kind of calm. Whatever Anna chose to do next, it wouldn't define her anymore. Danielle's story was her own now, and no confession or apology could ever take that away from her. Danielle returned home a week later, stepping into a house that felt both familiar and foreign. The walls still held the memories, but they no longer had power over her. She walked room to room, touching the furniture like she was saying goodbye to the version of herself who had lived there, the woman who'd been blind to betrayal, the woman who had loved too trustingly. She spent the next days cleaning out closets and drawers. Every photo of Marcus and Anna went into a box. She didn't burn them. She wasn't interested in revenge. She simply refused to keep ghosts on display. When the box was full, she sealed it shut and slid it into the attic, out of sight, out of her heart. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a fresh notebook. She began to write her story, not the one Marcus or Anna had tried to shape, but her own truth. Each page felt like another brick laid in the foundation of a life she was finally building on her terms. She wrote until her hand cramped, and then she wrote some more. When she finished the last sentence, Danielle closed the notebook and set it aside. She felt lighter, almost. She knew there would still be hard days ahead, moments when grief and anger resurfaced, but she also knew she'd never again let someone else's choices define her worth. That part of her life was over. In the months that followed, she started to smile without forcing it. She took long walks in the mornings and treated herself to flowers for no reason at all. She even began to imagine that, someday, she might open her heart again, but this time, she would choose someone who valued loyalty as fiercely as she did. On the anniversary of the day she discovered the affair, Danielle invited a few close friends over. They toasted to resilience, to fresh starts, to the kind of love that begins inside yourself. As the laughter filled her kitchen, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and it felt good. If this story touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments, because next time, we're sharing the story of a woman who discovered her husband had a secret family, and how she turned her heartbreak into something unstoppable. You won't want to miss it.